Good evening, I'm Jose Cardenas. Tonight, welcome to a special edition of Horizonte. It's our annual Journalist Year-End Show. We'll look back at the stories and issues that made headlines this year, as well as look ahead with predictions for 2016. The Journalist Year in Review Show coming up next on Horizonte.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. This is the annual Year in Review Show. Our journalists are Elvia Diaz, editor for La Voz newspaper, Jim Small, Arizona News Service editor for the Arizona Capital Times, and Linda Valdez, columnist and editorial writer for the Arizona Republic. And I should add, Linda, an author. Your book has just come out, Crossing the Line, A Marriage Across Borders. I'm sure we're going to want to have you back on the show to talk about, but tonight we want to talk about the big stories of 2015, beginning, I think, with the story we began the year with, which is the new governor taking office.
The new governor took office and he seemed to take charge of the legislature. He got his budget as he wanted it, pretty much, through in a hurry. He immediately shook up the Department of Child Safety, which turned out to be not such a good decision, I would say. Moving out Charles Flanagan and moving in Greg McKay, who really had no administrative experience, and the department is in worse shape now than it was before. 19,000 kids are in foster care. And then the governor moved on and settled the education funding lawsuit in a closed room with Republicans only, as he did the budget in a closed room with Republicans only. I think if you were one of his supporters, you would say he did a fine job.
Jim, your assessment of how quickly the governor moved. He seemed to take command immediately.
Yeah, he did, and they've talked a lot about moving at the speed of business. Has been kind of one of the catchphrases that the Ducey administration has used, and I think for them what that means is moving quickly and having a plan and kind of going out and executing it, and I think you saw it a lot. I mean, the fact that they were able to corral the legislature and get done with session in give or take 80 days, that's incredible. I mean, that is the quickest that's happened since 1968 that they've been out of their regular session. I mean, that is an astonishing feat. And to get the budget done in about 60 days is something that is always kind of a target that gets set by leadership. It's usually a pipe dream. It never really happens. They really did, though, I think, marshal the forces and got everyone to toe the line, at least for the first year of his governorship. And I think it was an impressive display, I think, of leadership and of management, at least within the Republican ranks.
You also have to notice that it has been impressive the fact that people are not panicking about the budget and about deficits. And so we're talking about a state that is solid financially compared to the past few years. Mm-hmm. So you would say that's impressive as well, right? I mean, the supporters and critics are not panicking.
Yeah, certainly, and obviously, the state's economic status is not so much a function of anything that Governor Ducey has done, but certainly, I mean, he's walked into a much easier first session than Governor Brewer did when she took over in 2009.
Well, and Linda mentioned the business aspect of this, running government like a business, and he did jump right in with things like supporting Uber. Yeah. And their ability to operate during the Super Bowl and getting rid of administrators whom he thought were not sufficiently pro-business. There's a theme there.
There is, and on top of that, right around that same time, the Super Bowl weekend, in fact, was the announcement that Apple was going to build its data center at that plant in Tempe. And that was an example. I think it's something that certainly the Ducey administration has put forward is, look, here's the benefit to having a businessman in office, because he was able to basically convince Apple not to walk away from Arizona and convince them to stay and invest hundreds of millions of dollars and create hundreds of jobs, hundreds of very high-paying jobs.
Elvia, you mentioned the satisfaction with the budget, but it turned out to be probably the most controversial aspect of the first half of the year for the governor because of the significant cuts to higher education and less funding for K-12 than a lot of people thought there should have been.
That's true. Less funding for K-12 and less funding for community colleges, or he essentially wiped out all kinds of funding for community college. So he has been controversial, but at the same time, what we had been seeing in the past few years is that we're spending too much money and we don't have enough. What I'm seeing right now, yes, education got hit tremendously, but I don't see, well, when I was mentioning about the panic is that the state, it's okay when it comes to the budget and when it comes to paying the bills. At least that's what I'm hearing. You're there, you see it every day. Of course you want money for K-12 and for community colleges, but when you have to choose and you have to pay the bills, I don't see a lot of people talking about how we're going to support the state.
Well, and Linda, the governor did win a lot of compliments and applause for settling the K-12 lawsuit.
Yes, he did.
And he's got his ballot initiative that's going forward. Your assessment of that?
Well, my assessment of that was it's kind of a double-edged sword. He did settle the lawsuit, which was a good thing. However, he's getting the money from the state land trust. There are questions about whether he's tapping too much into the state land trust, whether they're trying to take out too much, whether it's going to hurt it structurally in the long term.
And some big clashes with the state treasurer.
Exactly. That's where some of the questions are coming from. And the other issue about that, it's a huge infusion of money, $3.some billion that the schools really need. But it's less than what the judge said the schools were owed under the 2000 initiative when voters said you will fund inflation, which the lawmakers didn't do. So the schools took what they could get, and it's a good thing. But if the lawmakers and the governor look upon this as the end and we've taken care of K-12, then it's not going to be a good thing.
Elvia, another key aspect of the governor's first few months in office was his overtures to Mexico. He made several trips. He has hosted receptions, most recently this week, even for the new governor of Sonora. He seems to be making a major effort to repair what many view as the damaged relationships with Mexico during the Brewer administration.
He really has. I mean, it has been a huge contrast, and I think, Linda, you have actually paid attention to that very closely, and I have followed that. He has made clearly a point that he wants to do business with Mexico, that we should view Mexico as a business partner. However, what I find very interesting is the fact that he has been going to Mexico. He seems to be very close with the new governor of Sonora, so he's going there. She came here a few times, but he's not talking about the Mexicans here. The ones who are living here in this state. So to me, that's very interesting. That yes, it's great that he's trying to repair what Governor Brewer did, but by opening the doors and saying we must do business with Mexico. But I don't see him talking about the Mexicans, legal or illegal, living here in the state. And to me, that's a little disturbing.
Well, the other thing that I think he's done, he created his border task force, which several of the border sheriffs thought was counterproductive. They would rather have the money going to the counties.
The Sheriff's Association came out in opposition.
Exactly, yeah. They would rather have the money going to them, the cuts that have been made to the counties, and DPS is understaffed. So, and it seemed to me that border task force was a little bit of pandering to the border is such a scary thing in Arizona and we must look upon it negatively, which is, what Arpaio and Brewer and Russell Pierce all played to. So I really question the value of that, and I question how that's going to be seen in Mexico, because on the one hand, he's extending the hand of friendship, let's do business, and on the other hand, he's playing some of the old lines from the past.
And there's no money. I mean, let's be clear. You can talk all you want about the border and reinforcing and building the fence, but in reality, nothing's going to happen. It's all politics, which plays into how is it going to play? Let's do business, but, keep your people in Mexico. I don't want them here, that kind of message.
Jim, we talked a little bit about some of the governor's personnel moves, and I want to use one of his involvements as a segue to the other big name, I think, this year, which is Diane Douglas. Because one of the first things the governor got involved in was her attempt to fire some staffers, and he stepped in and reversed that. Some question whether he actually had that authority, but kind of symptomatic of the kind of year that Diane Douglas has been involved in, just one controversy after another involving personnel.
Yeah, and she's, generally been out there picking most of these fights. I mean, frankly, she's been a disruptor in kind of the education world, and it's been interesting to see, because generally the superintendent of public instruction is someone who's more or less kind of a figurehead. They run a department that is responsible for collecting a lot of data, processing it, sending it back out to schools, and really serving as kind of a conduit for federal money to kind of pass through. It's a job that doesn't really get involved in policy a whole lot, and there were, I think a lot of people who opposed Diane Douglas who rationalized her victory by saying, oh, she can't really do that much. How much trouble can she really make as superintendent of public instruction? It's an office that doesn't do much. Well, I think now they're finding out that, you can create a lot of havoc, even if it's not directly changing policy. It's not, she can't undo Common Core unilaterally the way that with what kind of the platform she ran on, but she can certainly throw some monkey wrenches in there, and she's done that with the State Board of Education. She's turned that into a constant series of back and forth lawsuits, and now they're going to be mired in litigation, I'm guessing, for the rest of her term.
And Linda, despite all of that, the recall effort, which many people thought would be a success, they just had to wait until they could legally get started, fell miserably short of getting the required number of signatures.
It did. I think it was really doomed from the beginning. That she won the election, and I don't think there was a groundswell of people paying all that much attention to her. I don't think it ever really stood a chance. I was not surprised to see it fail. And what she's trying to do is really solidify her power. She wants to invest that office with more power, and she's going about trying to demonstrate that she has the ability to do more than most people would think she should be doing.
And I think that's why you saw the governor, getting back to your original question, that's why you saw the governor inject himself into that staffing issue. Because at the end of the day, if it's an elected head of the department versus the governor's appointed State Board of Education, the governor wants to make sure that that is not, you don't have Diane Douglas or any other superintendent clawing power away from the executive and from the board that he appoints and he controls, and that he theoretically can influence and kind of have them do his bidding.
And Elvia, in some ways, her victory over David Garcia was seen as an anti-Mexican effort, or that it had an anti-Mexican component, because for some people, the only way they can explain her victory, where she spent no money on her campaign, no advertising, nothing.
And didn't go out, didn't talk to anyone.
Ran away from the
That's
press.
right.
But as at least in part, maybe it's because of the last name of her opponent. At the same time, she's said some things and she's made some overtures that I think many people in the minority community welcomed.
Well, it's and I think we talked about it before in previous shows. The fact of the matter is that Latinos are here, but we, generally speaking, are not voting. So you have a small number of people supporting folks like David Garcia, but they're not going out to vote. So of course that's going to make a huge difference, because then there's no support for David Garcia. He was the only Latino that could possibly had statewide office. We have not had one since Raul Castro. For more than 30 years ago. So I think partly it's because we Latinos are not going out to vote, despite of what activists say, which of course are making a huge effort. And of course, then we have people like Diane Douglas, and there's nothing we can do if she got elected, right, except for this recall. But then again, who's going to recall her?
And you mentioned Governor Castro. A big story this year was his passing. A lot of reflection on the significance of his rise to the governorship, and what the fact that there's never been another Latino statewide office holder means for Arizona, what it means for the Democratic Party, and whether both of those are just going to be fond memories for some people in this state going forward.
Well, I think maybe the hard truth is a Latino might have more success getting elected if he or she was a Republican right now in Arizona. And Garcia lost. He was in a race where all the Democrats lost, and I think his was closer than a
got the
lot
most
closer
votes.
than some of the others.
And I
yeah.
don't believe a Republican Latino will get elected here in this state, period, at least not anytime soon. So if that's the only hope, then we're doomed.
Well, there is no. I think the other hope is what you were saying. The other hope is that if Latinos start to vote in numbers that reflect their population, then there you can see a change. But it's probably going to take some time.
The other big name in 2015 was Arpaio. It's every year we've been doing this show for the last, ever since he's been in office, he's mentioned. A lot of press attention this year because of the contempt proceedings.
Yeah, this was, these hearings that have been ongoing, I think, since the springtime, off and on, really have I think lifted the veil on a lot of the operations of the sheriff's office, and there's been a lot of testimony about, essentially how did the agency go about violating the court order that they end the racial profiling and end some of these traffic stops and these immigration sweeps. And how they willfully went about basically thumbing their nose at the judge and kind of who was ordering that and really the crux of it, which we don't know the answer yet, is Arpaio and his top deputy have admitted that they did it, and they've basically said, yeah, we're guilty of civil contempt, but this whole thing is whether they're guilty of criminal contempt, which is a whole different kettle of fish and really opens him up to to jail time and criminal charges and so that's I think what we're all waiting to see. But there were some incredible revelations that came out of these contempt hearings. I mean, not the least of which was the idea that the sheriff's office was investigating the judge who was sitting on the who was presiding over this contempt hearing out of a way to ostensibly conflict him out of the case and get him booted off the case.
And despite what would for most office holders be a pretty bad year, he announces he's running for re-election. And Elvia, you were talking about no Latino is going to be elected statewide. Well, this wouldn't be a statewide race, but a pretty important one. But people are talking, I mean, some people are coming out of the woodwork talking about running against him. One of them, whose name has been mentioned, I don't think he has said he's running, is David Gonzalez, the U.S. Marshal for Arizona.
He has been mentioned before, but I don't think he's going to run if, Arpaio it's as popular as he is. The justice system just moves way too slow sometimes. I mean, we have been talking about this court hearing for such a long time. He has been investigated by the Justice Department and absolutely nothing has happened. And more importantly, he remains popular with his base, incredibly popular with the people who vote. So Gonzalez has a chance if he is to venture and actually do it. And there have been other names obviously mentioned for a possible run. But as long as he has that popularity, he will remain the sheriff until he wants.
And what they're talking about, though, is that if Gonzalez runs, it won't be as a Republican, but as an independent. I
think anyone would stand a better chance running for sheriff of Maricopa County as anything but a Democrat.
Well, and the thinking, though, is he also wouldn't survive a Republican primary. That Arpaio's strength would.
Absolutely, that's true. I mean, the thing that is disturbing, as you mentioned, the court system moves very slowly, but the thing that's disturbing to me about Arpaio is that he's been found guilty of racially profiling a third of the population. Well, what's wrong with the other 2/3? I mean, why are people not up in arms about that? Yet he remains this popular figure. And he thumbs his nose at everyone, but yet he remains this popular figure. You write something negative about Arpaio in the paper and whoa, you get flamed in the emails,
And Linda, we keep covering him, and I think I've mentioned this before. We, the media, keep covering every move that he makes. His nieces, and we are there. All of us.
You've also given him a lot of coverage for some of his most recent statements, which takes us to a different topic, but his call for the citizenry to arm themselves in light of the incidents that we've had in San Bernardino, in Paris. And we about middle of the year, we had our own gun incident at NAU. And most recently, the governor of California has leveled what many view as an insult to Arizona in terms of our gun laws, but gun issues were pretty prominent this year.
Well, they were indeed, and I think the case in NAU really shows the folly of everybody carrying a gun, because this was an altercation between young men who'd been drinking too much on a college campus. How often does that happen? I mean, it happens every weekend. One of them was armed, so some people wound up dead. I mean, and his life is ruined.
And Jim, you cover the state legislature. You know there's going to be a gun bill.
Only one?
Carry on campus with many of them.
Yeah, no, there will be definitely at least one bill to allow guns on campus, to allow people to carry on campus. I know that I think with Texas just recently enacted a law similar to that, and it's something that got pushed, I think, every year, the Brewer administration, and she vetoed it, I want to say 3 or 4 times. I'm sure it's going to come back. That was one of those bills that, that we didn't see come up during Ducey's first
year. The governor
year.
was pretty successful, and he made it clear he wasn't going to look at any controversial stuff, and that may have been what happened there.
Yeah.
Elvia, moving on somewhat past personalities, big headlines for some issues involving Dreamers, in-state tuition being one of them, and then the appeal of that decision by the Attorney General.
Well, talking about this justice system moving very slowly, this is one case, right? So immigration has been a huge issue in this state since SB 1070. So it's been a few years, and since then we had been in the courts fighting it. Now we know that SB 1070 doesn't exist. Only one section has survived. The same thing with Dreamers. So they get permission to stay here, executive order signed by Obama in 2012, I believe. So immediately Governor Brewer said, you cannot drive legally. We're not going to issue the driver license. And since then, we had been in court, by we meaning the Dreamers, of course, so finally they got the court in their side, and the state must issue the driver license to the Dreamers. So that's a huge headline for them after so many years. So that was great for them.
That and the in-state tuition.
And the state tuition as well, so the community colleges, so Dreamers can now pay the same in-state tuition in community colleges, and then obviously the Board of Regents followed, saying, "No, all right, we'll do it in state universities as well." So that's huge, but I don't think a lot of Dreamers are actually getting the driver licenses, so it's surprising to me that that's happening.
Let me move quickly to a few other topics. Terry Goddard, in his comments on the dust jacket of your new book, Linda, said Donald Trump should be reading your book. It should be required reading. He began, started off his campaign, it seemed, by attacking Mexicans, and has since attacked everybody else, but remains very popular. This is an interesting race. If anything can galvanize the Hispanic vote, you would think this would be it, but it's not clear.
I would hope it would galvanize a lot of people to get out and vote, but I think the Republicans are in a state of desperation. The mainstream Republicans, how are they going to get rid of this guy? Because they don't want him for their candidate. The business Republicans don't want to deal with Donald Trump. It is very disturbing that he remains so popular, but in a sense, he is reaping the harvest of all those years that Republicans were feeding the fringe with various dog whistles about minority groups, about illegal immigration, and that fringe, they used them to get votes. Well, now the fringe is taking over the party, and Donald Trump is their champion.
So this is always my favorite show because there's so much to talk about, but that's also one of the frustrations. We do need to comment very quickly about predictions for next year, and you had predicted that the recall effort against Diane Douglas wouldn't succeed. You were right. You said the governor was going to focus on vouchers. You were wrong.
I was wrong.
But let's see what you have to say this year.
Well, I believe for the first time, a Latino is going to be a nominee for the White House. So it's either going to be Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio.
or Ted Cruz.
Yes.
Okay. Your prediction, Jim?
I think Sheriff Arpaio is as damaged politically as he's ever been. I mean, he narrowly escaped the last election, only got 51% of the election, and I think that the Democrats will still, in 2016, be unable to get him out of office.
And Linda?
I think the legislature is going to stiff K-12 education again and expect the voters to do it.
Well, we'll see what happens next year. We'll have you all back, I hope, and we'll confront you with your predictions and see how it turned out. That is our show for tonight. Thank you for watching from all of us here at Horizonte and your Arizona PBS station. I'm Jose Cardenas. Have a happy holiday season and have a good evening.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station.